Hi everybody and welcome back. So today our lesson is about algebraic manipulation, and many times in physics we're going to be working with equations. And those equations are used to spell out or define for us how two or more measurements, quantities, might be related to each other. So we need to work with them, and in some cases we need to manipulate them to meet our needs. And what I mean by manipulate is to change them around in such a way so that we have the variable that we're looking for by itself. Okay, so for example, here are some sample equations on the right. So the first one is PE equals mgh. So that stands for potential energy equals mass times the acceleration due to gravity times the height. Another one, F equals ma. So this is force, specifically net force, is equal to mass times acceleration. And then the third one, V sub F equals V sub O plus AT. So this is final velocity equals original velocity plus acceleration times time. So we see equations like this all the time in physics. And you'll notice that in these equations, the left-hand side is potential energy, for example, or force, or final velocity. All right, there's one thing on the left-hand side. But imagine if that one thing that you're looking for is not the thing that's on the left-hand side. Suppose, for example, you needed to know the acceleration. All right, these don't say A equals something, but we still have a relationship between those variables. In this case, we're going to need to use algebraic manipulation to get that variable isolated. So that's what this is all about. So many times we need to isolate a variable in an equation. In other words, get it by itself on one side of the equation. Once we do that, then we can solve for it when needed. So for example, suppose we have the equation F equals ma, but we need to know the acceleration. Maybe we measured the force, maybe we measured the mass, and now we need to solve for the acceleration. So how do we get the acceleration by itself? That's the question. All right, so here I've outlined some helpful strategies, and I would definitely recommend writing these down. So the first one is definitely write out the equation. So whatever equation we know that relates those variables, we want to make sure we write that out. Then we want to underline the variable that we need isolated. You want to ask yourself, what's being done to this variable? All right, what's happening to that variable that we need? The next thing is make sure you know your order of operations, right? PEMDAS. So you learn this in algebra about parentheses and exponents, and then multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. Okay, so that's the order of operations that you know. What you're going to do is essentially work in reverse, and I wrote the letters out there. You don't have to memorize the letters, but to get the variable by itself. So if we're trying to isolate the variable, we need to work in reverse of the order of operations in order to do it. So we're going to do subtraction and addition first, then division and multiplication, then exponents, and then parentheses finally. Okay, and keep in mind when you're working through, what you're trying to be doing is undoing whatever was done to the variable. All right, so if something's being added to the variable, for example, we need to subtract in order to undo that. If something's being multiplied, we're going to need to divide in order to undo that. All right, so that's the way you want to kind of approach and think about this. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples here. So the first one is that F equals ma. Suppose we need to know the acceleration. How do we isolate the acceleration? All right, so we're going to write out here a little bit, and hopefully this pen will work for me. Let's see how it's going. All right, looks good. All right, so we have F equals ma. We're going to write out the equation first. And I'm going to underline the fact that A is what I need to know. I need this. So let's ask ourselves, what's happening to A? Well, I can see that A is being multiplied by the mass. All right. And that's it. There's nothing else happening to A. It's just being multiplied by M. All right. So in order to get A by itself, I need to undo that multiplication. Well, how do we undo a multiplication? We divide. So we're going to divide both sides of this equation by m. We want to get m on the other side of the equation to get a by itself. So let me use a different color here. So we're going to divide both sides by m. Remember, whatever you do to one side of an equation, you must do to the other. And then our m's cancel, and we end up with f divided by m equals a. And that's what we need. We wanted a by itself, and we got it, a by itself on this side of the equation. So a equals force divided by mass. So that's our first example. Let's look at another one. So in this one, example number 2, it says Vf equals Vo plus At. Suppose we need to know the acceleration. How do we isolate A? Okay, now, before we get into this too much, just be careful about this. This is sub F, so this is just one variable. It's the final velocity. This is also one variable. This is the initial velocity. The reason for the subscripts, guys, is because we're talking about two different velocities. We're talking about a final velocity here and an original velocity there. Okay, so still using V, but we use the subscripts to make sure we know which velocity we're talking about. Okay, so first, let's write out the equation. Vf equals Vo plus At. Okay, and again, I'm going to underline that A because that's what we're trying to solve for here. That was what we wanted to know in the example. So ask yourself, what's happening to A here? Well, A is being multiplied by T. We can see that because we have AT. And we also have this VO being added to that. All right, so we got two things going on here. We got multiplication happening, and we also have addition happening to it. All right, so if we're working in reverse of the order of operations, then that means we want to do the addition and subtraction stuff first. All right, we're doing everything in opposite order. And if you think about it, it makes sense because this is a separate term from this. All right, so we want to get rid of those separate terms first. So what we're going to do is subtract VO from both sides because it's being added. So I'm going to do minus VO on both sides. All right, so here, VO minus VO, that cancels out. And over here now I have VF minus VO equals, what's left? A times T. Okay, I still don't have A by itself, but I'm closer now. It's A times T. In order to get rid of the times T, I'm going to divide both sides by T. So we divide this by T, and we divide this whole thing over here by T. Remember, whatever you do to one side, must do to the other side. So we cancel out our T's, and now we're done. We have VF minus VO over T equals A. We got A by itself. We're all set. Looks good. Let's do one more. So this last one, it says example 3, solve for x. So we're going to get x by itself in this equation. X squared plus 4 equals z. All right, so we already have the equation written out. I'm going to underline it, the variable I'm looking for. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening to x here. X is being squared, which means multiplied by itself. And we're also adding 4 to it. All right, so thinking about our order of operations, when we're working in reverse, we're going to do pluses and minuses first. All right, so 4 is being added. I need to subtract 4 from both sides in order to undo that. So there goes the 4. Now I have x squared equals z minus 4. Okay, now think about squaring, right? In order to undo a square, we have to take the square root of both sides. So we're going to take the square root of x squared and take the square root of this. And the square root of x squared is x. So we're okay with that. And the square root of z minus 4, we can just write that here. Now, I'm going to be real technical for a minute. Technically, when you take the square root of something, the answer is plus or minus the square root. All right, because let's say you had like, what's the square root of 4? All right, or something like that. Okay, if we put in like -2 and we multiply -2 by -2, we also get 4. So our answer could be plus or minus z minus 4 in this case. All right, so in physics, this is an important skill. Being able to isolate a variable in an equation is going to be super helpful when we're working on solving problems. So it's something that you're going to need to get some practice with. Remember the steps, right? So write out the equation, underline the variable that you're looking for, think about how to undo what's being done to that variable, and make sure you work through the order of operations in reverse to do it. If you follow those steps, you should be in good shape. So I recommend some additional practice and then move on from there.